Hello there, and welcome to the Follow Your Stuff podcast. Hey, I actually got the book in the right spot on that one.
Perfect.
My name is Kevin Sylvester.
And I'm Michael Holenka.
And we are the co-authors of the book. You can see our names down there on the bottom. And this is a companion to another book we wrote a few years ago, which is called Follow Your Money. This is about, I guess we could say this is about where the money goes when you buy something.
That's correct.
And this is about how things are manufactured
Yep.
and made. But both of them deal with a concept that is tricky, and I think, especially I bet a lot of the kids who are watching this right now, this is an issue that means a lot to you. And this is the central idea of wages. How much is enough? How much is too much in some cases? We'll talk about that. And really, how much is I guess, fair, a fair and even wage. And this is a movable concept. I'm just gonna say throughout the book there are question marks throughout Follow Your Stuff. There are little question marks, and what they do is they're points where we want you, one like this one here, where we want you, the reader, to start asking you some questions and doing some research on your own. And so, wages, t-shirts are made for, people get paid pennies an hour to work.
Yes, they do.
Automatically, someone's going to hear that and go, that is completely unfair, right? How do we balance how much someone gets paid in, say, Bangladesh or Guatemala with how much they either should get paid, could get paid? How much is too much? I'm throwing a big question at you, Michael.
Yeah, it really is a big question. I think that when most people go, for example, when you would go into a store, and I would say to anybody who's watching this, don't you tend to try to spend everything else being equal, the least amount of money that you can in order to buy a particular product or service? And I think the answer is yes. And of course, what that means is that you're part of this process of keeping wages in some places lower than other places, because that flows through the whole cost structure. So how much is a fair wage? Well, it's really difficult in a global economy to compare what you have to make, for example, in a country like Canada or the United States to get by, compared to a country like Honduras or Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. So I would say that comparing that wage and how much you would need to make in Canada versus one of those countries is a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison in the first place. In a global economy, and this is the economy that we live in right now, for better or for worse, what everybody who makes products is going to be looking to do is to find the lowest cost alternative for a given level of quality. Mm-hmm. And given that most of the costs in making things aren't based on the raw materials, it's really based on the wages, that is always going to have the impact, the practical impact of pushing wages down until the minimum acceptable level. That's just the reality of the marketplace.
So is it almost a challenge to the people who are buying to say, you have a responsibility to look at where your stuff is made and to think about that, like to think about, I'm not going to buy clothes that are made in, and we've seen this happen. I'm not going to buy clothes that are made in X.
Yes.
I don't know. Let's say I don't mean to blame a country, but we talk a little bit about Guatemala versus Germany in the book.
Yes.
I'm not going to buy clothes that are made in Guatemala because those people aren't paid. Or should you say, I want to pay more for something that's made? Like, should you almost have a list of countries where you'll buy stuff from and places you won't buy stuff from?
Well, you can do that, but practically that's a lot of work. If anybody chooses to do that, and that's the beautiful thing about our system, is you have the freedom to make those kinds of choices. Mm-hmm. If you really want to go that far, and if you want to dig down that deep. The only thing that I would say about that is just, be careful, because let's say, for the sake of argument, you want to take a stand and say, okay, I don't want to buy anything that was made in Guatemala because I'm not happy with the wages that those people are getting. Well, the people that you're hurting are the people who are working in Guatemala, because now they're not working. So why were they working for that particular wage? Is it because they were crazy about it? Well, maybe not, but maybe that was the wage that they needed to support their families. So just be sensitive to that at the same time that you're thinking about that you don't want to take advantage of somebody.
Well, you're talking about apples and oranges. It's not fair to say that a $15 wage in Germany is definitely more than a $2 an hour wage in something like Bangladesh or Guatemala.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Because if you compare them actually to the cost of living and sort of, I guess, the general wages, they might be almost even. In a way, almost even, and that's why they're making the clothes in Guatemala and Bangladesh and not Germany.
Well, and that's true. And I think, by the way, there's a kind of, a sort of point of comparison that you could even make within your own country. There are some people who are right now who are making the minimum wage. There are some people who are making a significantly greater amount of money. Why is that? Well, generally it's because the person who's making a significantly greater amount of money has more alternatives, has more opportunities than that other individual. And you can sort of extend that metaphor to maybe Germany, Guatemala. Why is that person making that low wage in Guatemala versus the high wage in Germany? Well, there aren't that many choices right now in Guatemala. So really what the solution is and what we should all be looking for is how can we overall grow the entire global economy so everybody is better off?
So
That to me is the ethical challenge.
So how would you give us maybe kids a couple ideas that might be sort of solutions that they could do? One of them you've already talked about, which is educate yourself.
Yes. Buy products from Guatemala.
Well,
Buy the cheapest product available, because what is going to be happening when you're doing that is you are going to be putting a flood of money into that area. So let's just imagine right now that there's only two places to buy anything, and that's Germany or Guatemala. And stuff right now is far less expensive in Guatemala. Well, if you start buying Guatemalan products, it means that those people who are working in Guatemala are going to be having much higher wages, and they're going to be able to afford to do things, and the people in Germany are not going to be able to afford to do this. So what is the reaction of that person in Germany? Well, maybe their wages come down. So all of a sudden now what you've got is Guatemalan wages coming up, German wages coming down, until at some point they'll be equalized. And this, by the way, is what's going to happen sooner or later. To me, what the ethical challenge is, how can we figure out how to make this happen sooner rather than later?
With fewer people getting hurt, right? And this is a thing to bear in mind, because and you and I don't always agree on these things.
Agreed. We don't agree.
We do not always agree on these things. But on this one, I guess part of my argument back to you would be, how do we do that in a way that fewer people are hurt? Because there's no doubt that some of those workers we talk about in the book, we talk about sweatshops and places that are unsafe.
Yes.
There's no question. So how do we do that in a way that does it? I think we need more government regulation, more government oversight, keeping track of these regulations, what we might call a fair trade system or something like that.
Well, the difficulty with that, it seems to me, is that you are going to be having poor countries who are going to be competing to try to do things as inexpensively as possible, because this is what is in their self-interest. So it's going to be very hard for a developed country like, for example, a Canada or a United States to impose those conditions. And then there's the issue of sovereignty. Should, for example, the Canadian government or the United States government be saying to a jurisdiction that we insist that your people only work 10 hours a day? Should we be saying that, or should they be making that decision themselves?
That's an interesting question. I know what I would say. I would say yes, because we're part of that chain. That's a demand that I feel that we could make on the consumer end of things.
Well, but should it be done at the consumer level, or should it be done at the government level? It's the question.
Interesting.
So I think that what is happening, and by the way, this is happening right now. International companies like, for example, Nike, or, closer to home in Canada, Joe Fresh, are starting to look very, very carefully at what the labor practices are for their suppliers in those countries and trying to impose it that way. But I think that's preferable than to have the Canadian government try to go in and try to tell another sovereign nation what they should or should not be doing with respect to their labor laws. Because I would turn it around and just say to you, how would you feel as a Canadian or an American if, for example, the Pakistani government said, we don't think that what you're doing is right, and we think you should be changing what you're doing with your people within your borders? I think we'd say, well, maybe it's none of your business.
Interesting. Now, I should also mention, this is one of the reasons why we have question marks. I would even say this is a question mark.
This is a complete question mark.
Yeah, because we're not answering a lot of these questions.
And it's not black-white. There's a lot of shades of gray in between.
Definitely. Well, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoyed this.
That is this episode of the Follow Your Stuff podcast. I'm getting way better at putting the book in exactly
it's
the
unbelievable.
Right way. We were talking today about the idea of wages and ethics, and I would say that is definitely one where you have to go out and do a lot of thinking and a lot of research on your own.
Unquestionably. Yes. Yeah.
You can find out more at annickpress.com, and you can get the book just about anywhere books are sold. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.